On June 24, 2022, Roe v. Wade, the landmark decision and legislation that affirmed a woman's federal right to obtain an abortion in the United States, was overturned. The news of the overturning shocked, disheartened, and disempowered women of all kinds. But those women impacted most by this overturning are those non-white, financially unstable, and non-cisgender individuals. Kimberly Crenshaw, pioneering scholar and writer on civil rights, Black feminist theory, and race, offers her rationale on how social issues like reproductive justice disproportionately affect marginalized groups of people in her TED Talk titled The Urgency of Intersectionality. In this TED Talk, she discusses how she coined the term intersectionality to describe how many of our social justice problems, like racism and sexism, are often overlapping, creating multiple levels of social injustice. She elaborates in stating, socially marginalized people all over the world are facing all kinds of dilemmas and challenges as a consequence of intersectionality. Intersections of race and gender, of heterosexism, transphobia, xenophobia, ableism, all of these social dynamics come together and create challenges that are sometimes quite unique. Audre Lorde, Black lesbian feminist poet, confirms this ideology in her piece, There is No Hierarchy of Oppressions, when she says, as a Black lesbian feminist socialist poet, mother of two, I usually find myself part of some group in which the majority defines me as deviant, difficult, inferior, or just plain wrong. The intersections of her identity ostracize her and create a compounding effect of oppression, where not just one aspect of her identity is cause for discrimination, but all aspects of her person subject her to bigotry. Marginalized, non-white, financially unstable, non-cisgender women and reproductive bodies experience this exact same predicament, specifically with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. The cornerstones of the identities of these individuals, their non-whiteness, their financial standing, and/or their gender expression, are cause for intersectional discrimination and serve as grounds for the denial of reproductive rights. The overturning of Roe v. Wade is not an isolated incident, however. The rights of the non-white, financially insecure, and non-cisgender reproductive bodies have been under fire in the United States for a long time. The reproductive body is a life-giving entity, but it is shamed, mutilated, and persecuted as if it's worth nothing. And why is that? Well, of course, to affirm and propagate a white male dominance over society. The white man's institutions of white supremacy, capitalism, and heteronormativity are intimately connected and work together to affirm patriarchal societal autonomy and dictate what kind of woman can reproduce. White men have always wanted to exert total control and domination over society, and by controlling and shaming the reproductive body, white men can achieve that. By controlling and shaming the reproductive body, white men can determine when, where, and how women reproduce. This is important because if white men are able to take control over a woman's ability to reproduce, they are essentially able to take control over the projection of the human race and can manipulate it to best fit their idea of what society should look like: a white supremacist, capitalist, heteronormative establishment. It's true. Now, I'm going to ask you to think about something for a moment. When you imagine what a perfect family would look like, what do you see? Probably something like this, right? This picture of the perfect family ensures that only a certain kind of woman is able to reproduce: a white, financially stable, cisgender woman. There's a reason for that, and it has all been orchestrated by the white man's desire for societal autonomy and control over women's bodies. If a white woman is the only kind of woman that is able to reproduce, the white race will prosper and won't be infiltrated with children of color that pose a threat to the white man's ability to remain in power. If a financially stable woman is the only kind of woman that is able to reproduce, our capitalist economy that benefits the white man disproportionately will remain intact, because welfare benefits won't need to be forked out of the padded pockets of those white men to support poor mothers and children. If a cisgender woman is the only kind of woman that is able to reproduce, the patriarchy will prevail, save from the obvious threat non-cisgender individuals pose to the dominance of white men in society. To ensure that this perfect ideal of what family looks like and of what a worthy mother looks like prospers, the reproductive capability of women of color, of poor women, and anyone who isn't cisgender must be soiled and taken away. And rest assured, the deed has been done. The interlocking institutions of white supremacy, capitalism, and heteronormativity hinder the non-white, financially unstable, non-cisgender woman's ability to reproduce, and paradoxically protects the reproductive capability of the white, financially stable, cisgender woman. It's a completely biased and unfair reality, but that's exactly how the white man created it to be. Historically, white men have always desired to exert complete control and domination over women and society at large. Through the slave institution, white men brutalized, persecuted, and enslaved black women for their own benefit. Not only were black women subject to grueling manual labor, toiling crops to put more money into the pockets of white plantation owners, but black women's bodies were also used and abused as reproductive facilities. Black female slaves were subjected to their master's desire for them to reproduce because increasing the number of slaves resulted in an increase in profits. White men took advantage of this already vulnerable and marginalized population and exploited their reproductive capability for profit, rubber stamping their autonomy over black women and increasing their economic and, as a byproduct, social status in the process. This historical mistreatment of black female reproductivity set the stage for future transgressions across the reproductive bodies of women of color, poor women, and non-cisgendered individuals. For example, the concept of eugenics was established to malign the reproductive bodies of women of color and of poor women to prohibit them from reproducing. The term eugenics was coined by Sir Francis Galton in 1883, and the ultimate goal of the eugenics movement was to create a society with a superior genetic makeup by breeding out the undesirable traits of the non-white and the poor populations. This was done through the act of forced sterilization of black women, Latinx women, and poor women all across America. For instance, in North Carolina in the 1960s, black women made up 65% of all sterilizations of women, although they were only 25% of the population. And in California, from 1968 to 1974, the LA County USC Medical Center forcibly sterilized 240 women, mostly Mexican immigrant women. And in Alabama, poor African American sisters, 12-year-old Minnie Lee Reef and 14-year-old Mary Alice Reef, were coerced into undergoing forced sterilization. The Southern Poverty Law Center filed a lawsuit against the state on the Reef sisters' behalf, and the district court found that between 100,000 to 150,000 poor people were sterilized annually under federally funded programs, and others were coerced into consenting to sterilization under the threats by doctors to terminate their welfare benefits if they denied the procedures. All of these actions were done to curb the birth rate of non-white poor babies in America, ensuring that the white man's power was not disrupted or overthrown by that of mothers and children of color, and guaranteeing that the system of capitalism continues to prosper and the pockets of the rich white men that sit at the top of the capitalist food chain stay padded by eliminating the possibility of having to extend welfare benefits to poor women and children. But, of course, the white man's fear that their social and financial standing will be threatened does not only stem from the notion of women of color and poor women reproducing. It also stems from the idea of non-cisgender women reproducing. White men fear that the heteronormative social structure that situates them in a position of power is imminently threatened by the reproductive capability of transgender or non-cisgendered bodies. They believe that if non-cisgendered bodies are able to reproduce, there is a possibility that more non-cisgendered individuals will be created, which will inherently pose a threat to the heteronormative gender power dynamic that allows men to assume the role of the familial breadwinner and elevate their social standing. And what's more is that transgender and other non-cisgendered bodies don't always align with the heteronormative expectation of what a mothering body should look like. A cisgender female with breasts to breastfeed with, a vagina, and a birthing canal through which to deliver an infant. Transgender men, for example, may still have the capacity to reproduce, but they may not have breasts to breastfeed an infant with, or they may have undergone a phalloplasty and no longer have an accessible birth canal for a fetus to come out of. So, many reproductive healthcare providers assume that transgender patients do not need reproductive services, and so they refuse to treat transgender patients. In fact, 19% to 27% of transgender people report being turned away by healthcare providers who refuse to provide care for them. Outright refusals of care occur across all types of providers, including providers of sexual and reproductive health care. This active refusal of reproductive healthcare services reinforces the discrimination perpetuated against non-cisgendered bodies by the system of heteronormativity, and ensures that the white man's societal dominance is secure and safe from the clear threat that children from transgender or non-cisgendered bodies could produce. White men strategically employed the institutions of white supremacy, capitalism, and heteronormativity as tools of oppression to ensure that their social and financial standing remain intact by inhibiting non-white, financially unstable, non-cisgendered bodies from reproducing. It's despicable, but it's true. Now, the same institutions that prohibit non-white, financially unstable, non-cisgender women from being able to reproduce ironically encourage white, financially stable, cisgender women to procreate. For instance, the eugenics movement clearly had a negative impact on the reproductive capability of women of color and poor women, but it actually had a positive impact on enhancing the reproductive capability of white, middle to upper class, cisgender women. This aspect of eugenics was actually referred to as positive eugenics, and the obstetrician Caleb William Salibi originally drew the distinction between positive and negative eugenics, meaning the aspect of eugenics that sought to deprive non-white poor women of their reproductive ability, at the beginning of Part 2 of his book, Parenthood and Race Culture, An Outline of Eugenics, deeming that positive eugenics would seek to encourage the parenthood of the worthy, and negative eugenics would seek to discourage the parenthood of the unworthy. The worthy parents, of course, being those that are white, are financially well off, and conform with the gender expectations of heteronormativity. These worthy parents and mothers are supported in their reproductive journey by the fact that positive eugenic measures have promoted the idea that high-achieving, wealthy people should have children or have a family. The positive eugenics movement has introduced institutions and policies that encourage marriage and family life for such people. It has established sperm banks where eugenically desirable traits such as intelligence, wealth, race are criterial either for donors or are listed as present in the donor for users to consider in their choices. And it has created fertility and reproductive healthcare clinics in wealthy residential areas. These positive eugenics measures provide white, financially secure, cisgender women with the opportunity to breed more white, rich, cisgender children, ensuring that the white man's institutions of white supremacy, capitalism, and heteronormativity, which keep white men in their rightful position of power, continue to thrive. Moreover, the heteronormative family structure itself, which boasts a white, cisgender father who should serve as the breadwinner and protector of the family, and a white, cisgender mother who should serve as the nurturer and breeder of the family, supports and encourages the white, financially secure, cisgender woman's ability to reproduce. Bell Hooks comments on this reality in her book, We Real Cool, Black Men and Masculinity, when she says, white folks still represent this configuration, a white heteronormative family structure, as the only truly healthy family system. Hooks' statement supports the institution of heteronormativity's ideology that a heteronormative family structure is the only appropriate and acceptable kind of family, and a white, cisgender, financially secure mother is the only kind of woman or reproductive body that should be allowed to parent. Therefore, white, financially stable, cisgender women's ability to reproduce is protected by those white supremacist, capitalist, heteronormative ideologies, all in an effort to guarantee that the white man's racial profile stays superior, his pockets stay padded, and his role as a protective father figure remains unthreatened. The white man has slyly been asserting his dominance over society since the dawn of time. In an effort to preserve his societal domination, the white man utilizes the institutions of white supremacy, capitalism, and heteronormativity to control the reproductive body. These institutions impact the reproductive capability of women across the nation in a paradoxical sort of way. They encourage the reproduction of white, financially well-off, cisgender women and stunt the reproductive capability of non-white, poor, non-cisgender bodies. It's true. The white man and his subsequent institutions have worked to rape enslaved women for economic gain, sterilize the reproductive bodies of women of color and of poor women to preserve the white race and to sustain capitalism, and employ transphobia to deny reproductive health care to non-cisgendered bodies. But they have also worked to encourage white, financially stable, cisgender women to reproduce through the processes of positive eugenics and the preservation of the heteronormative family structure. The reproductive bodies of those women of color, of poor women, and of non-cisgendered individuals have been used as a vessel for the white man to secure and profess his societal dominance. It's disgusting and it's entirely unjust, but it's the truth. We can't stand for this anymore. We need reproductive justice. The reproductive body is a life-giving entity. The white man should not be able to continue to persecute the non-white, financially unstable, non-cisgender reproductive body for his own benefit. Reproductive bodies should be able to procreate regardless of their skin color. Reproductive bodies should be able to reproduce regardless of their need for welfare benefits. Reproductive bodies should be able to reproduce regardless of whether they fit into the heteronormative ideal that dictates what a mother should look like. The white man's white supremacist, capitalist, heteronormative agenda has no right in altering with reproductive freedom. So, we call for reproductive justice for all. Sister Song, Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective, and Loretta J. Ross, co-founder and former national coordinator of Sister Song, defines reproductive justice as the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children or not have children, and parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities, regardless of one's race, economic status, and gender expression. This is the reproductive world we should be living in. The color, the financial standing, and the gender expression of the reproductive body should not determine whether or not it is able to reproduce. All reproductive bodies should be given the equal and equitable opportunity to procreate if they so choose. The white man and his subsequent institutions of white supremacy, capitalism, and heteronormativity have no right to exploit, denigrate, and renounce the reproductive bodies of women of color, poor women, and non-cisgendered individuals any longer.